My name is Riley Carter. I'm 36 years old. At a luxurious wedding reception held at a high-end resort, just as the bride stepped out to show off her wedding ring, the MC stunned the crowd with an announcement. Please welcome Mrs. Riley Carter, CEO of Carter Biotech, who just signed a $500 million contract with the government. That voice echoed through the hall like a lightning bolt slicing through a clear sky. The bride's entire family froze in shock, because the Riley they had just applauded was the very daughter they had abandoned 12 years ago, and even claimed had died in an accident. I stepped into the spotlight as hundreds of eyes turned toward me. The very faces that once erased me from the family tree were now pale and trembling as the past they thought was buried came roaring back. I didn't need to say a word, my presence alone was the loudest answer. Have you ever been cast out by your own family, stripped of everything, and treated like you never existed? Do you believe that one day, the person they threw away could become the one they must bow before in front of the world? If this story strikes a chord with you, leave a comment and share your experience. Hit like and subscribe to the channel because up next, I'll take you on the journey of a girl left out in the rain who one day walked into a wedding as the person who made her entire family tremble. I was born and raised in a small town in Ohio, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone and news travels from one family to the next in a blink. I always tried to be the child my parents could be proud of. Throughout school, I never once dropped my place as a top student. I was on the debate team, won science competitions, and teachers often said, "This kid is going places." I truly believed that if I worked hard and stayed kind, I'd earn my parents' approval. But in that house, I was never the one they saw. To them, only Claire. My younger sister was worthy of being called their gem. Claire had her own talents, but more than that, she had always known how to be adored. She sang in the church choir, and my mother hand-sewed dresses for her performances. My dad constantly bragged, "Claire's going to be the best doctor this town's ever seen." And me? No matter what I achieved, they just nodded coldly. I still remember the night I got the full scholarship results from high school. I was one of the few selected, and the principal even praised me in front of the entire school. I couldn't wait to go home and hear my parents say they were proud. But when I opened the door, I saw them setting up a party for Claire. She'd just been accepted into a private college's music program. I stood there, certificate in hand, while their laughter filled the living room. No one even asked me what I had achieved. Time passed, and I learned to swallow my tears and keep moving forward. I told myself that one day, they'd finally see my true worth. That belief kept me going until I uncovered the harshest truth. At 18, I went to the bank to check on the education trust my grandparents had left me. It was the only money I was counting on to attend a top university, since we weren't financially well off. I had planned my future, picked my major, and felt ready. But the bank staff looked at me with confusion and said the account had been emptied just a few months earlier. Every dollar had been transferred to another account under my father's name. I was crushed. I rushed home, heart pounding, gripping the printed bank statement. When I confronted my parents, I tried to keep my voice steady. "Where's my college fund? I need that money for my university applications." My mother wouldn't look me in the eye. My father sighed, put down his newspaper, and said coldly, "We used it for Claire. She's going to study medicine. Investing in her is investing in this family's future." I choked. It felt like the floor was shaking beneath my feet. But that was my money. Grandma and Grandpa left it for me. I've worked my whole childhood for this. Why would you take it from me? My father looked at me without an ounce of remorse. His words were sharp and deliberate. "Claire is this family's hope? You've always buried yourself in books, none of that brings real value. If you can't handle it, then take care of yourself. Don't expect anything from us." I shook my head, tears falling, my voice trembling. "I'm your daughter too. How could you treat me like a stranger?" That's when my mother finally spoke, her voice ice cold. "Riley, don't make this harder. Think of it simply, one successful daughter in the family is enough. We chose Claire." I was speechless. I'd imagined many ways they might respond, but I never thought they'd outright say they had chosen to abandon me. That night, as rain poured down on our town, I packed a few clothes, my awards, and some old textbooks into a small suitcase. I planned to sleep one more night in the house while I figured things out. But as I stepped into the hallway, my parents were already there, staring at me without a hint of warmth. My father opened the front door and pointed out into the downpour. "Consider yourself no longer our child. From now on, you're on your own. Don't come back." I stood frozen, rain stinging my face. In that moment, I wanted to scream, to beg for some shred of mercy, but my throat locked up. Claire emerged from her room in a new nightgown, looking smug and slightly pitying. She said nothing, just shrugged as if this was all perfectly normal. I pulled my suitcase behind me. The sound of the door slamming shut echoed like a verdict. That night, I walked the streets with rain and tears blurring together. I was 18, homeless, penniless, with nowhere to turn. Everything I'd once believed in had crumbled in a single evening. In the days that followed, I slept on classmates' couches, bouncing from place to place. Sometimes I napped in the campus library, other times in hospital waiting rooms where I worked the night shift. I juggled 3 jobs: mornings at a coffee shop, afternoons answering phones at a clinic, and weekends cold calling for insurance sales. My body was worn thin, but my will never broke. I clung to one thought: if they saw me as invisible, I'd make them see me. There were moments the pain nearly swallowed me whole. Watching other students walk into class on their parents' dime, while I brewed coffee with textbooks open beside me, it hurt. But whenever I remembered that stormy night, I clenched my fists and pushed forward. I refused to let them be right about me. I wouldn't be their leftover. And from those sleepless nights, those tears masked by rain, I started paving my own road. A road with no traces of my parents, no favoritism, just me and the fire to survive, no matter the cost. That was the beginning of everything that came after. And it was the deepest wound I carried, one I could still feel even on the day I walked into Claire's wedding, watching her entire world unravel in slow motion. I left the small town in Ohio on a freezing morning. Rain from the night before had pooled into muddy puddles along the soaked dirt road. I didn't look back. I didn't even dare to hope I'd ever return. The small suitcase I dragged behind me squeaked with every step, blending with the sound of wind rustling through the trees lining the highway. I boarded the cheapest bus, heading straight for Chicago, a city I had only seen in books and newspapers. In my hands, I carried a few $100s in loose bills, a change of clothes, a couple of old books, and a wound in my heart that hadn't even started to heal. Chicago greeted me with cold wind blowing off Lake Michigan and the chaotic noise of a big city. I stayed in the tiny apartment of Sarah, a former high school classmate who had moved here the year before. She took pity on me and let me crash on her worn-out sofa. I still remember how it felt the first time I laid on it. My back ached badly, but at least I had a roof over my head. Sarah would often whisper, "Riley, things will get better. You're the strongest person I've ever known." I smiled and thanked her, but inside, I felt completely hollow. I got my first job at a small corner coffee shop. The morning shift started at 6, which meant I had to wake up at 5 just to make the subway. I learned how to make cappuccinos, lattes, and deal with rude customers. In the afternoon, I changed into a different uniform to work as a receptionist at a community hospital, answering phones, entering data, guiding patients. At night, when the city quieted down, I walked to a call center where I sat in a cramped room making cold calls to sell insurance. Juggling 3 jobs left my body drained, but I didn't dare take a break because missing even a single day meant not having enough for food or rent. During that time, I lived off instant noodles, expired bread, and free coffee from the morning shift. Many nights, I chewed on old toast while studying from borrowed books, my eyelids heavy, my hands trembling from exhaustion. Once, I passed out at the table and woke up to find tear stains blurring the pages. But I never let myself collapse completely. I knew that if I stopped, I'd be stuck in the dark forever. While I struggled just to survive, my family in Ohio told a completely different story. They told neighbors, friends, and even acquaintances that I had dropped out of school, wandered the streets, and one night died in a car accident. I didn't find out about any of this until months later when I ran into an old friend at the hospital where I worked. She stared at me like she'd seen a ghost. Riley? Oh my God. They said you were dead. My heart stopped, my pulse raced, and my mouth went dry. Who said that? I whispered. She hesitated. Your mom told everyone. She cried, said you ran away from home and got into an accident. We were all heartbroken. None of us ever thought we'd see you again. I wanted to scream, to rush back to that town and confront them all, but I knew it was pointless. They had chosen to erase me from their lives with a single lie, and if I returned, they would just deny everything. I stood frozen, feeling like I had been killed a second time. The first was when they stole my college fund and threw me out. The second was when they casually declared I no longer existed. After that, it felt like I really did disappear. I cut off all contact with anyone from home. I poured everything into work and study. By day, I worked. At night, I sat in public libraries, reading every book I could borrow. I enrolled in low-cost community college classes, collecting credits one by one. I had no family to support me, no money, but I had persistence. Every time I remembered them saying, "You're no longer our daughter," I clenched my jaw and turned that pain into fuel. There's a memory I've never forgotten. One winter night, I finished my shift late and stepped out of the call center just before midnight. The wind whipped across my face, and snow was falling thick and fast. I wrapped my old scarf tightly around my neck and hugged my book-filled bag close. The streets were empty, lit only by flickering yellow streetlights. I stopped outside the window of a fast food restaurant, watching families gathered inside, warm and laughing. A wave of crushing loneliness hit me. I wondered if my parents ever thought about me, if they knew that the daughter they claimed was dead was out here somewhere, dragging herself through each day just to survive. But that pain didn't destroy me. It made me harder, sharper. I learned how to get up from Sarah's couch and find my own tiny room to rent barely bigger than a closet, but mine. I learned how to stretch every dollar, record every expense, eat a simple meal that gave me just enough strength to work another shift. Most importantly, I learned how to believe in myself, even when no one else did. Sometimes Sarah looked at me and shook her head. You're like a machine, Riley, but I believe you'll escape this someday. I smiled and hid my tears. I never told her that inside. Every day still felt like a battle for survival. But that battle became the fire that shaped me. Those early years in Chicago, I was completely erased from my family's memory. They threw birthday parties for Claire, posted smiling photos online, while my old friends sent flowers to a cemetery believing I was truly gone. I lived like a ghost, hurt but free. Hurt because I was abandoned. Free because I was no longer chained to that cold, loveless house. Then I began to realize something important. If my family had declared me dead, why not live like I had been? Born again? From that moment, I decided I would rewrite my fate. I was no longer the girl cast out into the rain. I would become someone new, someone who would build a life from nothing, no matter how much sweat, tears, or loneliness it took. Looking back, that time felt like death and rebirth. I disappeared from the past, but I was quietly building a future no one, not even my parents or Claire, could ever imagine. And from the pain of being erased by my own family, I found the strength to start a journey no one saw coming. Those years of survival in Chicago taught me that if I wanted to live, I had to find a way to stand on my own. I worked every odd job I could find just to get by, but deep inside, I had one burning desire. I wanted to create something truly meaningful. Something that could change people's lives. Something no one could ever deny my worth for. I applied for a position as an assistant in a small research lab within a local university's biomedical department. No one really wanted the job: low pay, tedious tasks, mostly data cleaning, equipment maintenance, and note-taking. But for me, it was a precious opportunity. I worked diligently, watched every experiment, studied how the scientists asked questions, debated theories, and most importantly, trained myself to record every detail. One night, I was assigned to double-check data from a neural regeneration experiment. I noticed something strange. The cell samples weren't responding as expected, but in the notes, I found one small indicator that kept shifting something everyone had overlooked. I suggested a different micro method to deliver the nanoparticles precisely to the damaged area, reducing signal loss. At first, the lead professor gave me a skeptical look. "You're just an assistant, Riley. Don't waste time on wild theories." I didn't argue, but I secretly ran the experiment during lunch breaks. I tinkered for weeks, to the point where my hands trembled, from lack of sleep. Then, one cold winter morning, I broke down crying when I saw the results. The artificial neural fibers responded 3 times faster and showed significantly less damage. The first person I shared the findings with wasn't the professor, it was a young colleague named Ethan, a medical research graduate student whose eyes always sparkled with curiosity. I pulled him into the lab and showed him the data. He stared in silence, then spoke slowly. "Riley, you just opened a whole new door. Do you realize what you've done?" I laughed nervously. "It's just a small trial." He shook his head. "No, this could be the foundation for an entirely new neural implant system. It could change how we treat spinal injuries, strokes, even battlefield trauma." Someone looked at me not like a shadow, but like a real scientist. Ethan became my partner. By day, we worked in the lab. At night, we sat in my cramped apartment, papers, diagrams, and models spread everywhere. Together, we wrote the first lines of a design that would one day be called the Nano Implant System for Neural Signal Regeneration. In the months that followed, we faced countless hardships. The lab stopped providing funding, and the professor still considered my ideas to be foolish. But Ethan and I decided to go all in, pouring our own time and saving every little bit of our meager salaries to buy materials. I remember days when we only ate canned noodles so we could afford microchips. Our small apartment was filled with wires, test tubes, and the constant hum of computers running through the night. There were moments I lost faith. I asked Ethan, "What if we fail? What if all these sacrifices aren't worth it?" He looked at me, calm but resolute. "Riley, you survived after your own family abandoned you. You rose from nothing. No one on this earth gets to tell you you're not capable. And if we succeed, thousands of lives could be saved." That sentence became the fire that kept me going. Slowly, our first prototype came to life. When we tested it on an artificial neural model, the system performed more steadily than anything we had seen before. My hands trembled as I threw my arms around Ethan. He just smiled. "We just changed medical history. That's how Carter Biotech was born. The name was Ethan's idea," he said. "Let the world know that Riley Carter, the woman they pretended didn't exist now, has her name on a company saving lives." We founded the company with what little we had, renting a cramped office on the 3rd floor of an old building. I still remember our first desk, a scratched wooden table we bought from a classified ad, and no 2 chairs matched. But we didn't care. We had a dream, and that dream was big enough to fill every empty corner. In the beginning, we went door to door to hospitals, carrying our project descriptions and demo videos. Most people shook their heads. "Sounds interesting, but I don't think it's realistic." Still, we were patient. We just needed one chance. That chance came when a young neurosurgeon at a military hospital agreed to let us trial the technology on a veteran with spinal cord injury. The trial exceeded expectations. The patient was able to move again after months of paralysis. News spread quickly. Other hospitals started paying attention. We received calls and emails from all over. I remember the night we got the invitation to present at the National Medical Conference. I just sat there, frozen, hands trembling too much to open my laptop. Ethan placed his hand gently on my shoulder and whispered, "You did it, Riley. You're not just surviving, you're making miracles." That conference was a turning point. Investors reached out. Major hospitals signed on to implement our technology. Revenue soared. But the thing that moved me the most wasn't the numbers. It was the look in a patient's eyes when they lifted a limb they thought they had lost, or the smile of an old veteran taking his first steps after years in a wheelchair. In those moments, I heard my parents' voice echoing in my head. "As far as we're concerned, "You're no longer our daughter." And in my heart, I quietly responded, "You were wrong. I'm not just your daughter, I'm my own person, and I've built a life no one can erase." From an apartment overflowing with scribbled notes, Carter Biotech gradually became a biomedical tech empire. We partnered with top hospitals, expanded to multiple states. In just 7 years, the company was worth hundreds of millions. I was no longer the girl left standing in the rain. I had risen, with my own hands and mind, alongside the man who never stopped believing in me. Then one day, I received a wedding invitation. The bride's name was Claire Carter. My heart tightened. The past I thought I'd buried was circling back at the very moment I had reached a height they could never have imagined. It was a late autumn afternoon. The golden sunlight stretched across my desk as I opened a cream-colored envelope with elegant floral embossing. My assistant placed it gently in front of me and said hesitantly, "Miss Carter, this came from St. Mary's Hospital, possibly related to an upcoming event?" I nodded, signing a stack of contracts while opening the envelope. Inside was a wedding invitation. The bride's name printed in gold foil, Claire Carter. The groom, Dr. David Lawrence. I froze. My finger traced the glossy lettering, and it felt like I had brushed an old scar that had never fully healed. My sister Claire was getting married, and the groom was the highly praised neurosurgeon I had seen in countless headlines. The invitation didn't mention me. Not a word hinted that I had ever been part of the family. To them, Riley Carter had been dead for years, but that wasn't what stopped me. It was the small line in the corner, cordially inviting Miss Riley Carter, CEO of Carter Biotech, honored guest of St. Mary's Hospital. I understood immediately. Our company had just signed a sponsorship agreement with the hospital where David worked, deploying our nanograph system for neurotrauma treatment. The event organizers must have wanted a Carter Biotech representative to attend, and they chose me. No one in my family would have known that when they submitted the guest list. They had unknowingly invited me back in. I held the card for a long time, my eyes drifting toward the clear blue Chicago sky outside the window. My heart pounded not just from sadness, but from a strange surge of readiness. A chance to confront everything, a moment I never thought would come after 12 long years. That night, I placed the invitation on our kitchen counter. Ethan was cooking, and the smell of sautéed garlic filled the warm air. He glanced over, stopped stirring, and quietly wiped his hands on his apron. "Claire?" he asked softly. I nodded. He picked up the card, read it all the way through, and then set it down as if afraid it might hurt me. "Are you going?" I stayed silent for a long while, listening to the bubbling pot, to the sound of our son Ben giggling in the living room while playing with his building blocks. Then I answered slowly, "I have to. I've been running from the past for too long. If I keep hiding, I'll never truly be free." Ethan walked over and wrapped his arms around me from behind, his voice steady and warm. "I'm going with you. Not to fight anyone, but so you won't have to stand alone." I leaned into his shoulder, eyes stinging. In that moment, I knew I wasn't the trembling 18-year-old girl abandoned in the rain anymore. I was a woman who had rebuilt an entire world, and I was strong enough to face the place that once broke me. In the days leading up to the wedding, I prepared carefully. I didn't search for a flashy dress. I chose a simple black gown, elegant, refined. I didn't want to create a scene. I just wanted to be seen. To walk into that hall, not as the castaway daughter, but as a woman who had rewritten her fate. The night before we left, I couldn't sleep. Memories flooded back. The slammed door, the rain mixing with harsh words. I replayed my parents' voices. "As far as we're concerned, you're no longer our daughter." I turned toward Ethan, asleep beside me, his hand still holding mine. In the room next door, Ben shifted and mumbled, "Mom," in his sleep. Those sounds pulled me back to the present. I smiled in the dark. I wasn't alone anymore. I had a family of my own. The next morning, we left for the resort where the wedding was held. Ben sat in the back seat, asking, "Mom, do they have a swimming pool there? Are there lots of desserts?" Ethan laughed. "All of that, buddy. Just promise to behave. I watched my son through the rearview mirror, peace swelling in my chest. His innocence fueled my resolve. I wanted Ben to know his mom never gave up, never let anyone define her worth. By late afternoon, we arrived. The resort gleamed with chandeliers visible through large glass panels. I gripped Ethan's hand tightly as we stepped out. Ben trotted beside us, fascinated by the bright flower beds. I took a deep breath and walked into the lobby. The receptionist led us to the VIP guest area. On the check-in table, I saw my name clearly printed. Miss Riley Carter, Carter Biotech. I signed, feeling like I was stamping something permanent. The staff bowed and handed me a badge, directing us to a table near the medical professionals section. As we walked through, the piano music echoed gently, blending with soft chatter. Inside the hall, shimmering light from crystal chandeliers spilled across polished marble floors. I scanned the room and my heart clenched. Claire stood next to David, a radiant smile on her face. Her gestures hadn't changed, head slightly tilted when listening, fingers brushing up shoulder to hold attention. I recognized it instantly. I had seen it 1,000 times. In that moment, Claire turned. Our eyes met. Her smile froze. Her body stiffened. I saw the wine glass in her hand tremble. Then whispers began to ripple through the crowd. Someone asked, "Isn't that Riley Carter, the CEO of Carter Biotech?" My mother stood not far behind, her face pale as a sheet. My father stepped forward and blocked Claire, just like he used to when we were little, always her shield. I heard my mother hiss through her teeth, loud enough for those nearby to catch it. "What are you doing here, Riley?" I stood tall, calm, Ethan's hand resting behind me like an anchor. I smiled, not even a flicker of nervousness. After 12 years, I had returned. I wasn't the trembling girl left in the rain. I was a woman who had rewritten her story with nothing but grit and intellect. The piano stopped. The lights in the banquet hall softened. The MC's voice rang out, formal and steady through the speaker system. "Please join us in welcoming a very special guest, Mrs. Riley Carter, CEO of Carter Biotech, the company that just signed a $500 million contract with the government in the field of biomedical technology." The entire hall went silent. Even the faint clink of glasses came to a halt. Hundreds of eyes turned toward me. I could hear the murmurs ripple through the rows of tables. "Carter Biotech? Isn't that the company leading in neural tech? That's Riley Carter?" I thought she was. Claire stood under the spotlight, her eyes wide and unblinking. The smile still clinging to her lips turned stiff, then vanished altogether. I saw her champagne glass trembling in her hand, drops of golden liquid spilling onto her pale wrist. My mother staggered and grabbed the back of a chair, her face flushing from ghostly white to bright red. My father took long strides toward us, positioning himself like a barrier between me and Claire. His gaze was sharp, filled with fury and confusion. I walked slowly into the banquet hall, Ethan's hand steady on my back. Ben walked beside me, eyes wide with wonder at the sparkling chandeliers. In that moment, I felt no fear, just a strange peace, like each step was peeling away the years I'd been erased. The MC continued, his voice enthusiastic. "Mrs. Carter is the mind behind the nano-implant technology that is revolutionizing modern medicine. We are honored to have her with us today." Applause followed, scattered at first, then growing. I noticed a few doctors in formal wear nodding, their eyes bright with admiration. A group of guests turned to each other, whispering, "She presented at the Boston conference last month. I read her paper, total game changer." Meanwhile, my family sat frozen. Claire no longer carried the proud glow of a bride. She looked around, panicked, as if lost in the very celebration meant for her. I made my way to the VIP table. A server gently pulled out a chair for me. Ethan sat beside me. Ben climbed into my lap and whispered, "Mom, why is everyone staring at you?" I smoothed his hair and replied softly, "Because now they know who I am, sweetheart." The atmosphere shifted. Doctors, researchers, even a few politicians in attendance began buzzing with chatter. I caught fragments. "She's the Carter family's daughter?" I thought Riley Carter passed away years ago. There's definitely something being covered up. I noticed David the groom watching me closely from across the room. His face showed clear surprise, laced with unease. He looked at Claire, then back at me, as if trying to piece together a truth he'd never known. My mother couldn't take it anymore. She stormed over, her voice sharp and low. "What are you doing here? This is your sister's wedding, not the place for your spectacle." Ethan shifted, but I placed a hand on his arm to keep him seated. I looked straight at my mother and spoke evenly. "I'm not putting on a show. I was invited as an honorary guest of the hospital where your son-in-law works. Maybe you should ask why my name was on the guest list." My words carried just enough volume for the nearby guests to hear. Heads turned. Eyes landed on my mother, leaving her flustered. My father cut in, each word tight with warning. "Riley, you shouldn't be here. You'll ruin your sister's special day." I raised an eyebrow, my tone lower. "Strange. I merely walked in as a guest, and yet you're this rattled? Or is it that you're afraid people will finally learn the truth?" That question silenced him. His fists clenched, his face tensed. Claire stood behind, ghostly pale, her eyes wide with dread. Just then, an elderly doctor approached, his voice full of excitement. "Mrs. Carter, I've heard so much about your implant system. It's an honor to meet you in person." He shook my hand firmly, admiration shining in his eyes. Others began approaching too, asking for business cards, inquiring about the tech. I smiled and answered each, explaining the project and its real-world impact. As I spoke, I could still feel Claire's eyes locked on me. Her smile had faded to a stiff line, her hand clutching David's as if he were the only thing keeping her upright. But David wasn't looking at her anymore. His gaze kept returning to me, searching, questioning. The murmurs in the room grew louder. Someone whispered, "That's nothing like the story the Carters told. They said their oldest daughter flunked out, had an accident." Another replied. "But clearly she's standing here as the CEO of a company worth hundreds of millions. Who's really lying?" I didn't need to defend myself. Those whispers were the justice I'd waited for. Ben tugged at my sleeve and whispered, "Mom, who's the lady in the white dress? She looks like you." I smiled gently, kissed his head, and said, "That's your Aunt Claire." He tilted his head, curious. "Is Aunt Claire as smart as you?" That innocent question froze the air around us. Claire stiffened. David furrowed his brow. A few nearby guests exchanged looks. I only smiled and told my son, "Everyone walks a different path, Ben." David stepped forward. He smiled politely, though his eyes were still wide with surprise. "It's truly an honor to meet you, Mrs. Carter. I didn't expect today's guest of honor to be my sister-in-law." I shook his hand firm, like the renowned neurosurgeon he was. "Pleasure to meet you too, David. I'm just here as a guest, to celebrate your special day with Claire." But I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He looked at Claire, then at me again. "Strange. Claire's hardly ever mentioned you." Claire quickly interjected, voice shaking despite her best effort to stay composed. "Honey, not now. We still have a lot of guests to greet." I looked at her, and in her eyes I saw a fear only I could recognize. For years she had lived inside a story our parents had built, and now that story was beginning to crack right in front of everyone. As soft music resumed, I sat back in my chair and took a sip of champagne. The bite of the alcohol slid down my throat, not nearly as sharp as the memories. I had returned, and my presence alone was the bell tolling for the secrets that had long been buried. The music played on, the clink of glasses returned, but the energy in the room had changed. I could feel every glance thrown my way, not pitying like before, but filled with respect and curiosity. Many in the medical field approached to speak with me about Carter Biotech's latest innovations. A salt and pepper-haired neurosurgeon shook my hand tightly. "Mrs. Carter, your presentation at the Boston conference completely changed how we view neuro-recovery. My hospital is eager to adopt your monitoring system for post-op patients. Would Carter Biotech be open to collaboration?" I smiled. We're always open to partnerships that bring technology closer to patients. My assistant will follow up to discuss details. He nodded, clearly impressed. Soon after, a group of other specialists joined in. A young female doctor, glowing with enthusiasm, said, "I participated in the clinical trials of your nanosystem. The results were extraordinary. Post-op complication rates dropped by nearly 30%. Congratulations on such an incredible contribution." I thanked her, my chest swelling with both warmth and a bittersweet ache. Because while strangers honored my work, my own family still saw my existence as something shameful. Not far off, Claire was surrounded by guests. They had believed she was the Carter family's medical pride, and now they were eager to hear from her. An older physician asked, "I heard you studied medicine at Stanford as well. What are your thoughts on current trends in neurological treatment?" Claire hesitated for a moment, her eyes darting around like she was searching for an escape. Then she forced a smile. Well, I suppose the current treatment trends still focus heavily on platelet therapy and plasma rich in growth factors. It's fairly effective." The doctor furrowed his brows and exchanged a quick glance with his colleague. Strange. Stanford removed that method from their curriculum 3 years ago due to insufficient evidence. Why would she? His voice was low, but loud enough for a few nearby guests to catch. A wave of murmurs began to rise. Claire gave a patchy smile, trying to recover. "What I meant was, there are still professors who follow more traditional perspectives." But the nervousness was now clear. David, standing right next to her, had a smile that was starting to stiffen. I saw him tilt his head slightly, a hint of doubt flickering in his eyes. He looked at Claire, then glanced at me as if comparing two mismatched pieces of the Claire, two same puzzle. Another guest followed up, their tone sharper. "If you really graduated from Stanford, then you'd probably know the 2014 program focused on neural tissue regeneration using viral vectors. Were you part of that research group?" Claire bit her lip, clutching her wine glass tightly, her gaze slipping. She tried to smile. I mostly took online classes, so..." That statement made the atmosphere suddenly heavier. Everyone knew Stanford didn't offer online courses for the medical program. A few guests exchanged looks, eyes now tinged with doubt. David's frown deepened noticeably. He turned to Claire, his voice dropping. "I studied there too, Claire." "I've never heard of an online track for that degree," Claire fumbled, rushing her words. I had special arrangements. You wouldn't know about them." But the excuse fell flat, hollow and unconvincing. I stayed seated, slowly sipping my champagne, watching the scene unfold like a stage play that no longer needed me to say a word. My mother pushed through the crowd, her voice rising to cover the tension. "Claire is the bride today. Please, let's not overwhelm her with questions. As for academic discussions, let's save them for another time." But I saw the worry in her eyes, like the walls of lies they'd built over the past 12 years were finally starting to crack. One guest whispered, just loud enough for nearby tables to hear, "If what Claire said doesn't add up, then what's the real story? Maybe it's the sister, the CEO of Carter Biotech, who actually studied and did the research?" The murmuring swelled again, this time more distinct. David turned his head toward me, searching for an answer. I kept my calm smile and said nothing. I let them figure it out themselves. I no longer needed to expose anything. Claire started to unravel, her face flushed, hands trembling. I heard her whisper to David, "Don't listen to them. I'm a doctor. I've worked at the family clinic for years." David gave her shoulder a light squeeze, but his eyes were colder now. He replied softly, though I heard every word, "We'll talk later. This isn't the place to make up more stories." Claire froze. Her eyes flicked toward me, filled with fury and fear. I just looked back, not with satisfaction, but with a deep sadness. The little sister I once adored had become nothing more than a shadow built on lies. In that moment, I realized something. The truth doesn't need to be shouted. It walks into the light on its own when the time is right, and the day my family feared most had arrived. right in the middle of the grand wedding they tried to use as proof of Claire's success. I held Ben's hand tightly as he sat next to me and whispered into his ear, "You see, sweetheart, the truth always finds a way to speak for itself." Ben looked up at me with wide, innocent eyes. "Mom, is Aunt Claire scared?" I stroked his soft hair and gently answered, "Yes, because when someone lives a lie, they're always afraid of the truth." The music resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted. I knew that from this moment forward, Claire's wedding would never feel whole again. And I once declared gone was sitting right in the center of it all, more present than ever. As I brought the champagne glass to my lips, I saw Claire walking straight toward me, her face tight with tension, like it might shatter at any second. Her eyes locked on mine, her high heels striking the marble floor in fast, deliberate steps. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" she hissed through clenched teeth. I set my glass down and looked at Ethan. He gave me a small nod, his eyes steady on me, a quiet reminder that I no longer had to face this alone. Claire led me down the hallway behind the stage, into a small bridal prep room. Once the door closed, the music outside was instantly silenced. The space was so quiet I could hear her quick, uneven breaths. She turned around, tears already streaking her face. "What do you want, Riley? You were already dead to everyone. Why did you come back?" I stood there for a moment, looking at the sister I used to hold on stormy nights when she had nightmares. The sparkle in her eyes was gone, replaced with confusion, fear, and years of buried anger. "I didn't come back to ruin you," I said calmly. "I'm just living my life truthfully." Claire gave a bitter laugh, but it broke into a sob. She sank into the makeup chair, burying her face in her hands, shoulders shaking. "You don't understand. You don't know what it was like after you were gone." "I didn't disappear," I said flatly. "I was thrown out, into the rain, and no one in the family came looking for me." Claire looked up, eyes red. "I was too young to do anything, Riley. But I knew. I heard Mom tell the neighbors you died in a car crash. I believed her at first. But later, I realized it was all made up. He said, it was the only way to protect the family's reputation. That if people found out you dropped out, worked odd jobs, lived on the street, they'd blame our parents. That we'd lose respect." I stepped closer, my voice low. "So you all erased me with a lie? Claire, did you ever ask why I dropped out? Why my tuition disappeared?" Claire didn't answer, just clenched a handkerchief tight. I continued. "Because that money, my entire education fund from our grandparents, was taken and used for your school. Our parents gave it all to you, and I got thrown out for questioning it. You lived in that house, Claire. You saw it. You knew, didn't you?" Claire cried harder, shaking her head. "I didn't know back then. I thought, Mom said you left on your own." "And you believed that?" I asked, soft but firm. 12 years, Claire. Not one message, not one call. Did you never wonder why I vanished?" She stayed quiet. I could hear the music outside shifting. Tone, probably the opening dance, but inside that small room, the air felt heavier than any orchestra. "I knew you were alive," Claire whispered. "I saw your picture in a medical journal once. That's when I realized you never gave up. But I couldn't say anything. I'd already become the pride of the family. I was scared that if you came back, I'd lose everything." I sat down in the chair across from her, breathing slowly. "Did you know I used to sleep on strangers' couches? Work 3 jobs a day? Eat expired bread just to make it through the month? I almost died once, Claire. Not from a crash, but from being discarded by my own family." Claire covered her mouth to stop another sob. And in that moment, I felt a strange softness, not pity, but understanding. My sister had been a victim too, in a different way. "I was forced to live inside the shell you left behind," she whispered. "Dad and Mom pushed me into medicine, told me to be better than you. I hated it, but I was weak. I didn't have the courage to tell the truth. I didn't say anything. In my eyes, Claire was no longer the proud, cold bride standing at the center of the wedding. She looked more like a child trapped in a house full of lies, so scared she had to live as a copy of the sister she helped bury with a lie. I don't blame you, I said slowly, but I won't let the silence go on. I have a family now, a son. I don't live for anyone's approval anymore. If you really want your own life, you have to start telling the truth to yourself and to the man you're about to marry. Claire lifted her head, her eyes shimmering. David will never forgive me. David deserves to know the truth before his entire life is tied to a lie, I replied. My voice no longer cold but honest. She stayed quiet for a long while. I stood up, placing my hand gently on her shoulder. The door was never fully closed, but no one can open it for you. You have to stand up on your own. I turned and walked toward the door, my heart lighter, as if I had just let go of a boulder. Not because I had forgiven, but because Claire was willing to face the truth. Behind me, her quiet sobs still echoed, like the voice of a child who had finally dared to acknowledge a fear she had buried her entire life. As I stepped out of that room, the light from the ballroom ahead spilled toward me, bright and dazzling. Ethan was still there, standing beside Ben. They turned to look at me. No words, just Ethan's eyes, filled with quiet understanding. I walked over and took his hand. Inside, my sister was still sitting alone, facing herself. And I knew, tonight, nothing would ever be the same again. I returned to the ballroom just as the music shifted into a classical waltz. The lights softened, glittering across the dance floor. Guests began to move, couples stepping onto the floor for the opening dance, but no one was really paying attention to the music anymore. The center of focus had shifted to a strange, almost eerie silence hovering over the head table. I walked through the doors with steady steps, not rushed, not avoiding anyone. Every step felt like walking through layers of memory, through wounds that had only just begun to open. I saw my father standing at the aisle, face flushed with anger. He didn't look at me like a father seeing his daughter return. He looked at me like I was a threat. Riley, leave now. This is Claire's day, not your stage. His voice was low, but loud enough for half the room to hear. I stopped a few feet from him, facing him directly. I didn't come to take anyone's stage. I was invited as an honored guest of the hospital, where Claire's fiancé works. He clenched his fists, his eyes flickering with control slipping through the cracks. Don't play the victim again. You've always wanted to defy us, always embarrassed us with your arrogance. And now you come back during a wedding to smear the family's name? I hadn't responded yet when a voice spoke from the left. A woman in her early 40s stepped forward, holding a small recorder in her hand, walking calmly into everyone's view. Excuse me, Mr. Carter, Mrs. Carter, I'm Anna Murphy, medical correspondent with Medical Frontline. I have a question. My mother froze, her eyes darting. We once did a feature on Carter Biotech, where Miss Riley Carter was the founder and current CEO. Our data showed that the company's nano-implant technology helped save thousands of patients suffering from paralysis, strokes, spinal injuries, including many veterans, children, and civilians. May I ask, why was someone like that erased from her own family? Why, in over 10 years, has her name never once been mentioned in any of the Carter family's records or public speeches, despite the family receiving funding from the very company she built? The room erupted. Whispers spread like wildfire. Across dry grass, people turned in their seats. Some stood up entirely. Guests murmured like ocean waves. I saw my father glance at my mother, then to Claire, who had just returned from the hallway, her face still streaked with smudged makeup. My mother stepped forward, regaining her usual composed poise. Family matters should not be aired in public. We're not obligated to share every personal issue with the press or outsiders. But the moment she finished, a man in a black suit stood up from a nearby table. I apologize, but I'm the chief surgeon at Mount Sinai's critical care unit. The system Miss Riley developed helped us reduce post-op complications by over 30%. She's no longer just a family matter, she's a major contributor to modern medicine. If her family once denied her, then this is no longer a private matter. At that moment, David stepped forward, his expression tense. He looked around the room, then turned to Claire, his voice hoarse but clear. You told me your sister died in a car crash. You told me she never studied medicine, never did anything of value. You said she was a burden, something you wanted to forget. Claire took a step back, her lips trembling. David turned to me. Riley, are you really the founder of Carter Biotech? I nodded, my voice calm. I started with nothing. Carter Biotech was built from a 2-bedroom apartment, with a friend who later became my husband and the belief that no one could stop us from creating something meaningful. David stood silent for a moment, then looked at Claire. And you really didn't graduate from Stanford, did you? Claire looked around, her lips pressed tight, the stares piercing into her like blades. She said nothing. She simply looked down. Anna, the reporter, stepped forward again. Miss Claire, please confirm. Do you actually hold the degree listed in your publicly shared credentials? My mother interjected sharply, raising her voice. No one has the right to interrogate my daughter on her wedding day. Yes, they do, came another voice, an elderly guest seated in the front row. Because your family used the legacy of the eldest daughter to build up the younger one. Because those lies affect not just your family's reputation, but the credibility of every medical institution you've touched. I stood still. My heart no longer pounded. Time seemed to slow, each moment unfolding like a scene in a film. Claire raised her head, eyes brimming with tears. I'm sorry, she whispered quiet, but the entire ballroom heard it. You were never the one who was wrong. I only did what Mom told me to. I was scared that if you came back, I'd lose being the daughter they wanted. A long silence followed. I saw my mother turn away, her eyes hollow. My father stepped back, his face pale, as if someone had struck his pride. I walked forward and gently placed a hand on Claire's shoulder. I don't have to live as someone else's copy. Just like I no longer live in the shadow of the past, I turned to the people watching us, doctors, journalists, friends, colleagues. I didn't come here to reclaim honor. Honor isn't something others give us. I came to end the silence, so that children like my son, or girls once cast aside like me, know we don't need a family's permission to live as our true selves. Applause broke out, not in unison, but genuine. Ethan stepped forward and took my hand, then ran over, wrapped his arms around my leg, his eyes gleaming. In that moment, I was no longer the girl erased in a rainstorm. I was Riley Carter. I was a mother. I was someone who stood up and no longer feared anyone's gaze. The applause eventually faded, but the air in the hall remained unsettled. Some guests quietly left their tables. Others turned to each other with hushed whispers, eyes filled with doubt, shock, or quiet empathy. In the soft lighting, I could see the gradual shift in the crowd's mood, stunned at first, then curious, then leaning toward truth. I was about to take Ben back to our table when David approached, his face pale, hands buried in his pockets as if holding back something immense. He gave a small nod toward the hallway just outside the ballroom. Can we talk for a minute? I looked at Ethan. He nodded, bent down to hug Ben, and whispered, Mom's just stepping out for a bit. You stay here with Dad, okay? Ben nodded, mouth still holding half a cookie, his eyes sparkling, completely unaware of the emotional earthquake that had just taken place. David walked ahead. I followed. The hallway led out to a terrace, where lanterns cast a soft glow over the stone-paved courtyard, creating a strange, serene calm after the storm. When we stopped, he turned to face me, breath still heavy. I need to ask you something, he said, locking eyes with me like he was trying to confirm something bigger than reputation or marriage. Your company, Carter Biotech, has it ever partnered with or funded a private clinic in Vermilion? I frowned. Vermilion? You mean my family's clinic? David nodded, his voice growing hoarser. Yes. They said they had support from one of your research divisions, but when I checked, all the documents were just scans, no authentication. Worse, I found a large number of Medicare insurance claims that were falsified, mostly for services that never existed. I stood still. A cold chill ran down my spine. You're talking about insurance fraud? David nodded, his eyes unwilling to accept what he was saying. Do you know your parents, Claire? They all signed off on those records? I turned toward the garden. The night breeze lifted my hair from the back of my neck. I closed my eyes. Part of me had sensed this for a long time, since the night I discovered my scholarship funds had vanished without a trace through all the years I lived on. The margins, while they rebuilt the house, expanded the clinic, threw lavish parties. I replied slowly, each word cutting like glass. I'm not surprised, but I need to know more. Have you told anyone yet? David shook his head. Not yet, it's still just suspicion, but I downloaded copies of the internal files. The more I look, the worse it gets. The diagnosis codes don't match. The procedures never happened. The attending physician listed is Claire. And you and I both know, I nodded, finishing the thought for him. We both knew Claire never had a medical degree. She just wore the white coat, sat in the office like a real doctor, signed papers, and gave quick exams to elderly patients who had no one accompanying them. David stared at me. Riley, you know them better than anyone. What am I supposed to do? This goes way beyond a wedding. This is criminal. I looked up at him. You want my honest advice? He nodded without hesitation. Send those files to a jester. Lawyer. Then, notify the Office of Inspector General for Health and Human Services. The longer you wait, the more likely you'll be seen as complicit for helping cover it up. He swallowed hard. Claire. She was someone I once loved. You loved someone who didn't really exist. She lived a role your parents created under my name. If you forgive her, it doesn't mean you have to stay silent. David sat on a wooden bench outside the hallway. His eyes no longer fierce, just tired. I sat beside him, leaning slightly against the cold railing. I think I'm going to cancel the wedding, he said after a long silence. Not because you showed up, but because I realized Claire isn't the person I thought. Maybe she did love me. But love can't be built on a mountain of lies. I rested my hand on my knee, voice low. I didn't come to break anyone apart. I came because I had to face what they buried. But if this truth came even one night earlier, maybe it would. I have saved everyone a lot of pain. David nodded, eyes staring into the distance. Thank you. Not just for the advice, but for showing up. If you hadn't, I might have lived my whole life inside a lie. I nodded gently. The wind still whispered. The faint laughter from the ballroom drifted in, like a sound from another world. I knew clearly. Tonight, it wasn't just a bride stripped of her mask. An entire system of lies had begun to crack from within, and this time I wouldn't turn away. I wouldn't walk off into the rain with a torn suitcase. I had become strong enough to face the truth and, if needed, drag it into the light. We left the wedding hall in a silence that felt deeply real, passing through a blur of confused glances. Ethan held my hand firm but warm. Ben walked ahead, clutching the little party favor they'd handed out to kids, glancing around like he still believed he was at a glittering carnival. I said nothing. I didn't need to. Everything was already clear. The sound of high heels echoed behind us, then faded. The door shut. I stepped outside with my husband and son, heading to the car Ethan had parked near the emergency exit. No one saw us off. No one stopped us. No more sweet words laced in lies like the ones I once dreamed of hearing from my parents and sister. Everything felt like a storm had just passed, and inside me was peace. The car pulled away from the hotel grounds, streetlights casting soft streaks of gold across the windows. Ethan placed a hand on my leg, stayed quiet for a long time, then gently asked, "Are you okay?" I leaned back into the seat, eyes gazing out the window, and let out a long breath. I don't know. Maybe I'm okay. Maybe I'm relieved. Maybe both. He nodded. I'm proud of you. Not because you're a CEO or because of what you just did in front of all those people, but because you didn't let hatred take over your heart. I took his hand. I'm not always strong, but when I look at our son, when I look at you, I know I can't let the past define who I am. Months have passed since that night. Life seemed to return to its usual rhythm, but in truth, everything had changed. Not through fists or revenge, but through truth. And truth, once revealed, has its own way of opening new doors, even where there were only walls before. One morning in March, while tidying up the little library corner of my home office, I found a silver-gray envelope sealed with red wax. The handwriting on the front made my heart skip. It was Claire. I sat down on the cushioned chair by the window, holding the envelope in my hand, my heart tangled with mixed emotions. Ethan was out in the garden with Ben, planting baby mustard greens, so the house was filled only with birdsong and the soft early spring sunlight spilling across the hardwood floor. I opened the letter. Riley, I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not sure you even have any feelings left for me enough to forgive or not. But I'm writing this letter because I want to live without pretending to be someone I'm not. David called off the wedding. He said he couldn't live with someone who didn't know who they really were. I don't blame him. I understand. You were right. I'm not a doctor. I never graduated. Every document was fake, arranged through shady connections by our parents. I used to think that if I didn't continue that performance, I would be nothing. But then I realized if I keep living a lie, then whatever something I do have, it'll never truly be mine. Our parents are under investigation. The Office of Inspector General has contacted the family lawyer. I don't know how it will all unfold, but I've submitted my own sworn statement. I'm tired. But for the first time, I can breathe. Thank you for coming back. Not to destroy, but to end something that never should have existed. Claire. I set the letter down in my lap. For a moment, Claire was no longer the one who pushed me out of her life years ago. I saw a little girl, trapped for years by ambition, by the illusion of success built by our parents. I didn't hate her. I only felt sorrow. Sorrow for the years neither of us got to live as ourselves. The following week, I held an internal meeting at Carter Biotech headquarters. After presenting new research plans, I asked the team to stay a few more minutes so I could share something personal. I announced the creation of the Carter Foundation, a scholarship fund specifically for students whose families have refused to support them or who were forced to drop out for non-academic reasons. We won't ask what school you went to, where you're from, or what your parents do for a living, I said, placing my hand over my heart. We just need to know you have a dream, and no one standing behind you. Then the Carter Foundation will stand beside you. That announcement spread across social media like a jolt to the collective consciousness. Messages and stories poured in from all over. One person left home at 16 for choosing a major deemed worthless. Another worked 3 jobs just to pay tuition after their parents said, "If you choose it, you pay for it." Every letter, every message was like a bell ringing deep inside me. I wasn't alone, and I wasn't cut off from the world anymore, not like I was in my youth. One afternoon, while Ben and I were out in the backyard garden, I was teaching him how to use his finger to poke a small hole, drop in a bean seed, gently cover it with soft soil, and water it just enough. My son followed closely, his eyes glowing as if discovering something magical. "Mom," Ben looked up and asked, "why do we plant each seed one by one? Doesn't it feel too slow?" I smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Because each seed needs its own time. Some seeds have to wait through a whole winter before they can sprout. But the important thing is, if you choose the right soil, it will grow, even if it's late." Ben nodded seriously, turning back to continue his work. I watched the rows of soil slowly being covered with those tiny bean seeds, and felt a calm settle in my chest. There are some roots we don't get to choose, but we can choose where to plant them. And that's what I've done for myself, for my son, and for every child who has no one believing in them but themselves. What would you think if someone once rejected by their entire family became the one to reach out and help others rise? If it were you, would you return or quietly walk away? Life isn't always fair, but how we respond to that unfairness is what defines us. I didn't seek revenge. I didn't use power or reputation to erase the past. I simply chose to live with integrity and plant faith again in those who had their chances taken from them, like I once did. And you? What would you choose if it were your story? Thank you for listening to mine. If stories like this one touch something in your heart, be sure to follow the channel so you won't miss the next ones about family, choices, and those moments that change a life forever. Because somewhere in these stories, you just might find yourself.